Hey everybody, Mike with Games Played Badly, and today on Session Zero, I talked to Michael, who runs a podcast called Chafing Armor. Now, they've been running for 5 years, and he's been producing content on a bi-weekly basis that entire time. So that is incredible in itself. But on top of that, the podcast is a actual play D&D podcast with some of his homebrew world and the players sound amazing from the standpoint of how they interact. The storytelling is fantastic, and it's all around a good time. So I can't wait for you to get a chance to meet him. Also, it is getting toward the holidays, and I may or may not be producing content depending on scheduling, but I wanted to wish all of you a very happy holiday season and a safe one too. Hopefully you're able to get together with your friends and family over this holiday season, and I'm wishing you all the very best. Also, as usual, I have my Dungeon Glitch shirt on. This is one of my favorite ones. The kindness is contagious. I tend to wear this a lot. It's a reminder to me to be kind to people. I don't really need that reminder, but every once in a while it's hard to be. So, but if you want to take a look at this shirt or anything else that Dungeon Glitch produces, go to gemfirefly.com. And when you get ready to check out, put in our code BADLY15, BADLY 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. I, again, really enjoyed this interview. Michael is a great guest, and his podcast is fantastic. I'll have links to all that stuff down below. And please like and subscribe. We're trying to grow the channel a little bit, and I appreciate all of you who have already subscribed. And without further ado, that interview starts now. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Doing good, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
I had to have you on just because we share the same name, so
Right.
Almost obligatory.
It's the Legion of Mikes
Yeah,
and Michaels.
Yeah, and we met on Twitter actually in one of those live spaces, which I've never done before, and it was about tweaking your Twitter profile and getting how to get more Twitter followers and things like that. And you and I connected just because of the sheer nature of your podcast, which falls right into kind of what I'm into. So I'm glad you reached out. And your podcast is called Chafing Armor.
That is correct.
And that sounds painful and delightful at the same time.
It's a lovely name. My podcast is about 5 years old now. And when we came up with the podcast, I want you to know that all of my players had better names than Chafing Armor. All of them had better names. But here's the thing. When I went and searched for those names, there were like 7 other things that had already claimed them in one media or another. Mm-hmm. And when I went and looked for Chafing Armor, the only thing I could find was an obscure, if you remember in Skyrim, you could find those endless books. Mm-hmm. And one Skyrim book had a thing called a treatment for Chafing Armor. So when that was the level of obscurity, I was like, that's it. That's right. The one for me.
Yeah, perfect. I went through the same thing. The Games Played Badly thing was came about when I have a group of people that I play with, and we typically play games and we don't read the rules, and then we realize something's not right, something's broken if it's like a board game. And so I said we should call ourselves Games Played Badly, and that stuck. And then I actually did find that there was a Games Played Badly after I started everything in the UK, but they don't really use their names or anything like that. So I was like, I already came up with it. So there you go.
It's an eternal struggle. One of my players, Lee, has a separate podcast called the Peeves and Qs, and a great name. And he had searched and didn't see anything. And then after he launched it, he found there was a podcast with that name. But fortunately, it's no longer active. But, you know, It's just when you're on the internet, it's almost impossible to find something completely unique.
Agreed. Yeah, it's very difficult. And that's kind of the reason why I do this is I originally started as like a miniature painting channel. Mm-hmm. And there's such a glut of miniature painters who are way better than I was. I just said, you know what, let me go ahead and see if I can pivot. But why don't you tell me more about your podcast? I did take a look at it. I listened to a couple bits and pieces of several episodes. 5 years, you have a lot of content up there.
I do. We have released every single week. Every other week for 5 years, and
Wow.
sometimes more if there's a special episode or something else we're doing. We have a special episode coming up for April Fools next year that's going to be fun. So things like that. But so that's why we are at over 125 episodes at this time. Now, as far as the podcast itself, Chafing Armor, it's a real play Dungeons and Dragons. We have 3.5 rules, heavy homebrew, where Marezi the half orc barbarian, Tix the gnome paladin, Thora the tiefling fighter, Penton the spell sorcerer, and Distant Bells the kinku rogue are on a mission from God, literally, to heal a mystic staff and save the world while riding a necromantic chicken hut.
That's funny.
The chicken hut is what kind of seems to bring people in. They really like that chicken hut, who is named, by the way, Audrey 3.
No, that's good reference.
Mm-hmm.
So now tell me about your players. Is this all the original cast that's been together the entire time?
So it is completely the original cast. The only difference is we have added one player. Marezi is my daughter, Izzy, who it's players. One of my longtime listeners, Duke, has mentioned that it's like he's listened to her grow up, because she's
Right.
18 now.
Oh my goodness.
But we did add Riley, who is a Thora, the fighter, and Riley is the daughter of Dare. So it's a you mentioned before that you didn't really hear like swears and everything. I do. My podcast is pretty much PG-13, so every once in a while a swear will sneak in there,
Right.
and there will be a little bit of innuendo, but it's fairly tame as far as things on the internet go.
Yeah, I that's a big statement too. Yeah, be careful what you search for, folks.
My goodness gracious. I did think about that, but fortunately, Chafing Armor, the worst thing you find is like treatment for like running chafing, which I do find. I think somewhere in the back of my head that was the impetus, because I am a long distance runner, and chafing is known to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have something I will tell you offline, which I think you'll find funny, but I'm not going to say it here.
We'll keep that for after the show.
Yes, absolutely. I should do the because when we do these, I have a whole lot of footage that I end up cutting, and I was going to post them in their entirety and just call them like the uncut versions or whatever, because there's some fun stuff that happens after the fact, but some of it's not so PG. So
I completely understand. As far as other changes, though, really the only big thing is that Lee, who is both a Twitch streamer and a podcaster like me, his character actually died. Osokai, the Shifter Ranger, was the original character, and he was killed in the game. He was actually assassinated, and he made this new character, the Kinku Rogue, Distant Bells, who, funnily enough, the other characters never learned his name for like months because he just never, they never asked him and he never told them. And
right.
then finally, it was actually, we did a crossover with a streaming show that was quite delightful, and that's actually when they found out his name.
Well, now, so that's the interesting thing. So, actual play podcasts, I've always been kind of interested in you're playing to an audience, right? I mean, is that how you're assuming, or is it we're just playing and recording it? How do you differentiate there?
Well, I do want you to know that, like, as a dungeon master, I've always been the dungeon master, no matter what. I actually, growing up, only played Dungeons and Dragons a little bit. I did play it, but most of my formative years was either playing Palladium, various versions of that, particularly Ninjas and Super Spies and Beyond the Supernatural. And then in college, it was Vampire the Masquerade. But I always wanted to be a storyteller. That was my goal, is I wanted to tell a story. And I wanted them to come along with me, and I wanted them to have fun. I envision my players, they are the heroes of a movie. And really, more specifically, I think of it as a movie because it's big budget, because I can do whatever I want. But really, it's more like a television show in that it's episodic. It I think of my show exactly like a genre television show. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Supernatural, anything like that, where I have an overarching theme and I have a episodic nature to it where it's building upon itself. And that is how I view my show. That is how I run my show. But I want to tell that story, and I want my players to have a good time while doing it.
Yeah, I think, I've talked to multiple podcasters, and some people are there's some difficulty there running actual play podcasts, because you're playing, but you're also playing for an audience. And so trying to make sure the game's as authentic as possible, but people also find it entertaining is it's a fine line.
It really, really is. And I cannot stress this enough. I could not do this without my players. They are so on board. They're so game. They understand that while this is absolutely a Dungeons and Dragons game, and this is an excuse for me to meet with my buddies and play with them, and especially now, this has really special meaning because my daughter is now in college in another state.
Oh, wow.
And so every couple of weeks, I get to hang out with my daughter, who's no longer here. And I'm in this house with my wife, and we're empty nesters now. It's wonderful that I get to do that. But they understand that we are making a show. And they work with me to kind of, it is a balance that that's why most of my shows are about 45 minutes long. Sometimes they'll run longer. I've had shows run over 2 hours. It's as long as it needs to be, but I find that like 45 minutes to an hour is really just what people expect a podcast to be.
Right.
And so that's what I try to build it to.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's some a lot of podcasts out there. When you do actual play, they're running 3-4 hours. I mean, Critical Role's a really good representation of that. The problem with me is I can't sit and listen to podcasts that long, because I just really want to play. So
And
I mean,
I love Critical Role. Oh no, I'm sorry. I just want to say I love Critical Role, but like if they weren't amazing, there is no way I would listen to that. And I, again, being a long distance runner, it's like I just save them for, okay, well, I'm running a marathon now. I guess I'm going to catch up on the Critical Role.
Right.
And I would never make that show like that because I wouldn't want to listen to it. And so I try to make a show that's like I would want to listen to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, duration is a big thing. Duration is a big thing for my stuff too, because my stuff can run long because I like to talk. So, so I try and keep them around 30 minutes or so. But you're going to find less engagement when there's like an hour-long interview, or I used to do these marathon like painting sessions, and people would almost never get through them. So I've tried to keep it nice and succinct, and so that way they're more ingestible without losing any content. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And the behind the sauce is, we all know the real hard part about Dungeons and Dragons is not playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's getting 5 or more people together in one place at one time.
Correct.
And so when we meet, we almost always, there are exceptions, but we almost always record 2 at the same time. And I structure my little episodic thing to be 2 episodes. By the way, I often fail and it ends up being 3 episodes. And that's
Right.
fine. It doesn't matter. We just set the next one.
Right.
But I have like the most recent one as of this recording is a solo episode where Penton, the Spellscale sorcerer, he's actually, during a battle, an evil illusionist or a crazy illusionist teleported their chicken hut to another city, across the continent, and he's got to go rescue it. And so because he's the one that has the connection to it. And so I love doing these little side quests. They're really fun because it lets the character, the player, really breathe with their character and have more fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from that standpoint, when you look at as what DMs do, it's important that everyone get their moment to shine. There are always stronger personalities in groups that tend to try to basically have all their stuff done and everybody else just kind of follows them. I try and make sure that everybody has their own little story arc and things like that. So that way it's fun for them too. And they're just not a prop for somebody to use. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's a struggle. It
Mhm.
really is a struggle. My daughter, even though she is a big personality, she tends to take the back seat by nature. And when it comes to role playing, and Riley, the Dare's daughter, tends to be a little more quiet. And so I try to add things and do things to kind of bring them to the forefront.
Mhm.
The rest of the characters are all crazy and they jump in all the time.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. I mean, it's 5 years producing content every couple weeks. That is a big deal. I mean, if as a creator myself, I find it difficult to keep up with schedules like that.
The biggest thing that I believe in is scheduling ahead.
Mhm.
I tried doing webcomics for 5 years. I was a terrible artist, so I stopped. But one of the advice I got early on was like, do not just start publishing without having a buffer first.
Right.
And so I always, long before we started, I had at least, I think, 2 months worth of a buffer. And I think it was even more than that. And now it's several months of a buffer because we record as often as we can. And because if you're the listener, even if you're not consciously thinking like, "Oh, it's Monday, Chafing Armor's downloading," you might be thinking that. But if it doesn't, like, you kind of go, "Huh? Like, what's going on here?" And
Right.
it disconnects you from the story. You've mentally adjusted that this is going to come out every 2 weeks, and you see it every 2 weeks, and it's just comforting. It would
Mhm.
just, imagine if you watched an episodic television. Like, God knows we don't do that anymore, but if you did, where it's releasing every week, and they just didn't release it one week, it would be so weird. And I think that's a contract that you have with your listener. You don't
Mhm.
have to record every week or even every other week, but whatever that schedule is, I think you should really try to stick to it.
Right. I agree with you. That's when you're talking about that, I immediately thought about Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty just randomly disappears mid-season for like 3 weeks. You're going, what is going on?
Hmm.
And it really makes, I mean, for me, it frustrated me where I'm just like, I will wait for them to do the entire season and I'll watch it. But otherwise, I don't bother anymore.
I very much do the same. Very much do the same.
so,
Um,
so I
Go
mean,
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, please.
So as far as your listenership goes, do you have an active community? Are people talking back with you? Or are they commenting on the storylines and the characters? Do they have favorites? Do you sell merch?
So I have a wonderful, dedicated listenership. And what I love about them is that they will just randomly comment. I mean, everyone who's a podcaster knows that you put out your podcast and it just disappears out into the void.
Right, right.
And it's like no one has ever heard it, no one's ever seen it, you don't know what's happened. And what I have found personally is I do have engagement on Facebook, but most of those are people who know me casually, who
Mhm.
also like D&D, and that I put something out about it and they started listening. 99% of my direct engagement comes from Twitter, because Twitter just like you found me in that space. Twitter has a very strong role playing ttrpg community,
Absolutely. Hmm.
and I have a little bit of engagement on Instagram and a few other things. But I will say, obviously, you have a YouTube channel. I do not have a YouTube channel in the way that I'm releasing content, but
Hmm.
I do release my podcast on YouTube.
Hmm.
And some of my earliest listeners found me on there. And I want to really encourage people, if they have a podcast, just whip yourself up a free YouTube channel and slap your logo on top and release it the audio on YouTube, because YouTube is the third largest search engine in the world,
Right.
and people search for it on there. And now if you search for Chafing Armor, you'll see my podcast, you'll see Spotify and all that stuff, but
Mm.
you'll also see the YouTube.
Yeah.
And the critical thing that I always let people know is you want to be where your listeners are. It's not the other way around. It's not you telling the listener, "Hey, go over to Spotify and check me out."
Right, right.
You're saying, "Hey, oh, you're on Spotify? Then I need to be there."
Right. Yeah, I think it's a very smart way of doing it for all the podcasters who watch these interviews. But And actually, what I was going to do is actually strip my videos down to just audio, and I started doing that already, and throwing those up as podcasts, so people don't necessarily they're not limited to having to go to YouTube, because there are people who don't like YouTube for whatever reason. So I have audio versions of all of these interviews I'm going to be throwing up on Spotify or wherever. That's where I'm going to need help, because I don't know anything about podcasting. So I'll contact you about that offline.
Please do.
So it's wonderful you get a chance to play with your daughter. Our other, and it seems like it's becoming a generational group.
It really is. I mean, again, Riley is growing up. She hasn't graduated from high school yet, but she's older, and it's been so great. I mean, with the exception of Lee, all of the other players, James and Dare and myself, are all dads. We the really weird part is, because of complete coincidence, Lee, of course, I say of course, Lee lives in Australia.
Oh wow.
He's our international player. My favorite thing is getting him to do his American accent. I just love it. It's just so great to hear him do it. I'm American.
Yeah, right. They always go country on that one, don't they?
Oh, it is. It's great. It's just great. And I live in Oklahoma, but because of various coincidences, James already lived in Ohio. Dare and Riley, of course, being his daughter, they moved to Ohio just recently. And my daughter started going to college in Ohio. So now the vast majority of Chafing Armor is actually an Ohio podcast.
Yeah.
So, it's, but one of the nice things about the way we do this is it's always been virtual.
Okay.
It's always, we record natively on our computers, and we talk to each other on Discord.
Okay. Yeah, very common way of doing it, actually. I mean, it's funny because I'm from Oklahoma as well. You're like the second person I've talked to in like 2 interviews. It's I was born in Tulsa, and I grew up in a little town called Cookson.
Gosh, I know so many small towns in Oklahoma, but I don't know Cookson.
So if you Broken Arrow.
Oh, I know Broken Arrow. Yes.
So outside of Broken Arrow is a town called Keys.
I think I know the Keys. Yeah.
And then outside of Keys is Cookson, and Cookson is literally a general store and a dirt road. I mean, it's bigger than that, but the original Cookson was actually flooded, kind of like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So you can actually go and dive and see the original town.
Wow.
So very interesting.
Well, see, I'm my day job is I'm a salesman, but on the side, I'm a voice actor, obviously. I'm sorry, a podcaster, obviously, a voice actor, and I'm also a children's magician. And so as part of the summer reading program, I have performed in just dozens of Oklahoma towns.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So when I say I really do know a lot of these little ones, I really do mean that. But that was a new one to me.
Yeah, you could drive through it and not realize you were in it. We've talked about you, we've talked about your players, and we've talked about a little bit of the lore of your world. What do you think makes your podcast different?
Well, the one thing, this is obviously isn't completely unique, since there are several people who do it, but my world is entirely made up. Now I am drawing on the larger world of D&D. So I am pulling, I have the Raven Queen, and Garl Glittergold is Tix's god, and so the general world of D&D is the Chafing Armor world. But then it really goes off the rails. I have this there is the players actually just now, over 100 episodes in, found out the name of the god that is opposing them, that is trying to kill them and trying to find this mystic staff. And it was this very obscure god. And I even showed them, I had a printout from like 2017 of the god, because I was working on it. So I created a lot of lore. And the other thing is, before I was a children's magician, I was a children's storyteller. And most of that is telling folklore.
Yeah.
And so I will just randomly take folklore and shove it in my podcast. So a perfect example is they fought a coven of hags, and I had a sea hag, and I had a forest hag. I forget exactly they're called, moss hag, but then the other one was a boo hag. And a boo hag is from southern Louisiana folklore, Cajun folklore. And because one of the ghost stories that I tell is about a boo hag who says, "Skin, take yourself off," and her skin unravels and she leaves it on a spindle while she flies off at night, and how she's and all that kind of stuff. And so I just added her to the podcast because I think boo hags are really cool and they're really creepy.
Very creepy.
Yeah, and while some people may know this name from Darby O'Gill and the Little People, the Dullahan is I'm going to make myself really dumb, Irish folklore of a soul collector. And not only did they encounter and kill a Dullahan, but that folklore became critical to the death of Osokai. Weaving that in there and weaving it in with the Raven Queen, who the Raven Queen mythos, a lot of that is taken from Irish folklore. And so I will just freely pick from these various folklore elements and insert them in my show.
That sounds wonderful. I mean, it's those homebrew worlds can be amazing as long as they're not too obscure sometimes. If you keep something that's a little familiar, you can draw listeners in, I would imagine. But that sounds fun. I listened to bits and pieces of several of them, and I really enjoyed them. So I have a whole catalog to go through. So, I mean, has this been one continuous? I mean, obviously you've had different story arcs, but it's one overall adventuring group. I mean, at what level are they now?
They just turned level 9.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So they are really getting up there, getting powerful. And I actually leveled them a little quicker from 8 to 9 because I realized I had kind of held them back a little bit. But they are very powerful now. And some of the things like, say, if imagine, normally this would not be possible, but imagine if with, say, the help of a god, if a mind flayer infected a kraken. What would that look like?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the players found out. They haven't had to directly fight it yet, but they probably will.
No.
So, I love just having a lot of fun with what could be possible. And it does kind of keep them on their toes, because the truth is, while I feel like I'm a pretty good dungeon master, I am not a rule master. Like, I don't have all of the rules just sitting in the back of my head that I can whip out at any given moment. To be honest, James, the spell skill sorcerer, is much better at that sort of thing with Dungeons and Dragons, and second with Lee and Dare, also very, very knowledgeable. And even my daughter, she's run a Curse of Strahd campaign before. So, I do want to have the rules be consistent, but I don't want them to rule the game.
Right. I think that's a very important differentiation. I made somebody on Twitter was talking about this, and my games are definitely heavy lore. They're heavy RP. They can be heavy combat when they need to be, but if somebody tells me they want to do something and they have a good reason for it, make a skill check and see if it works. I'm not going to say, I'm not one of those guys who's going to go through and dig through tomes to find all the obscure rules. Matter of fact, I've eliminated a lot of rules. I mean, like, encumbrance is a thing, but unless you're trying to carry around, a bronze statue, then there's not a real need to check it. I'm not a big alignment guy. I find alignment to be kind of odd. It was something I struggled with in 3.5 and earlier editions, just because there was such a heavy penalty for violating. If there was any alignment change, it was a massive hit. Very, very punishing. But there are a lot of things that I don't bother even caring about, because they don't further the story. And if they did, I'd use them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want the characters to feel emboldened to try things. I want them to understand if they do something crazy, that something crazy bad could happen.
Right.
But what I tell them is, if they fail, then something interesting is going to happen. It's not that, oh, you failed and now the orc cuts you in half.
Right.
There was once where Osukai had a series of 5 consecutive failures, something like that, and he ended up falling off of a cliff, a tremendous 200-foot drop, definitely dead cliff. The next episode was all of the characters trying to save him. So this whole episode took place in 20 seconds, as these players and a ring of Aarakocra and a summoned wind elemental all tried to save this one guy who was falling to his death. And and this is the thing. None of that would have happened if he hadn't failed those rolls. It was way more exciting than if he had just succeeded and dun da da. So I really like the failures because it just gives us really interesting opportunities to tell stories.
I agree. I agree entirely. I think we probably have similar DM styles from the standpoint of I just kind of let things happen, and especially when you're playing in a homebrew world, you can't possibly have thought of everything. So the players and their actions are actually writing the history of the world. And it's so much fun to do.
Mm-hmm. And I like it when my players outthink me. I like it when one of the things my players do really well is avoid combat. They do a really good job of like, well, there's no reason for us to fight these people.
Right.
Let's just not. Let's intimidate them. Let's talk our way out of it. Let's give
Right.
them something. Let's satisfy them. And so often, when I've built in that combat, they have found a way out of it, and I like that. Now, obviously, sometimes there's no way to avoid combat, but even then, I like the way that they deal with it. I like the way that they use their powers, and I think that I like the way that we've built this strange world
Mhm.
that is so like the first episode of Chafing Armor is called Orcish Jazz Hands Are Canon. And that is that when Morezi was told that her brother was still alive, she just out of nowhere said, I do jazz hands. And I was like, okay, well, that's canon now, that then when orcs are happy, they do jazz hands. And so it's canon in Chafing Armor now.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. So you release every what day do you normally release your podcast?
Every Monday. So every other Monday, every 2 weeks, we record. I can really consider doing it every week, but I just felt like the schedule would be too punishing for my
Yeah,
players.
I get
And
that.
I edit my show, so it would literally kill me if I had to do that. Even as it is, I struggle sometimes to keep up with the
Yeah.
editing. Because as I've gone on, I take my editing very seriously, and
Mhm.
in my later ones you'll hear I have sound effects, I have music.
Yes,
I
I did
really,
notice that. Yeah, there's a whole
Mhm.
bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I that takes time, and I instinctively knew back then that if I did it every week, I could do it, but it would have just been crushing.
Yeah.
And it's so much better to have a schedule that you can deal with rather than just to have more content.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. Content creators, everybody out there who's making content, I think you're fantastic. Just because it's a lot of work, and people. That's the reason why I do this show, so people understand what goes into, creating podcasts and creating games and writing modules and art or making whatever. Because I think it's really easy to take it for granted, and it's also a reason, like for some of these people who are getting paid for this, to demonstrate why they deserve to be paid. I mean, there's really shouldn't have to be that, but sometimes it's like, they work really hard doing what they're doing. They deserve to be paid for their work. So,
Well, I just want to tell you, first of all, one, thank you for doing this,
mhm,
but also to acknowledge like how much more difficult these things are when video is involved.
mhm,
I don't have video, but when I was a teenager, my friend was really into editing, and he had the old setup with the VCR and the VCR camera so that he
mhm.
could edit back and forth between them. And one of our other friends was sitting there watching him edit, and he just suddenly became furious. And he said, "It it just can't take this long. Like it
Right.
can't take this long." It blew his mind that it would take that long to edit a 4-minute video.
Right.
And obviously, like the technology has come a lot further,
Mhm.
but whenever you add video to a project, you exponentially increase the difficulty. And even if it's only audio, the time and effort that goes into editing a hour long, 2 hour long, 3 hour long, however long thing is
Right.
tremendous. And there's no one else to do it for you. It's all you.
Yeah, and on the video front, it is more. It tends to be more difficult just because I add elements. And it saved me a long time. Like I do okay, but I'm pretty bare bones with it. I don't go super crazy with it. My husband's a talented artist, even though he will never tell you that. But he created our logo, he created our animation for the beginning of the video, all sorts of stuff. So it is a little. It is there's just I think podcasting is difficult because I don't know how to do it. So it's just it's challenging, but I enjoy it. And during COVID, it was a great way to keep busy, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff. And so I was like, at the end of a really crappy time in history, I can come out and say, hey, I did all these things I never thought I could do.
That's fantastic. I love that attitude.
Yeah. All right, so we're looking at every 2 weeks. Folks, I will have links and everything down below to everything regarding Chafing Armor and the podcast. And you've seen some of the artwork with all the characters kind of rotating in and out. I highly recommend it because it sounds great. What I've listened to, especially the last one that I listened to, was the bits that I saw and listened to were fantastic. I was really impressed with the sound effects, like timely. I wasn't expecting that, so it was really, really good.
I really enjoy sound effects, and so if again, I'm trying to make the show I would want to listen to, and it's just we were talking about Critical Role before. Easily the most popular Dungeons and Dragons show that's out there. They don't edit. There's no editing, and there's no sound effects, and the only music is what they play natively while they're playing. So, it's not, I don't have to do this.
Right.
I could literally just take all of the audio, mix it together, pop it out, and it would take me 1/10 of the time. But I love when that music starts to swell when the fight scene starts, and when there's a magic spell cast and there's that sound in the background. It just is so nice, and I love doing it.
Have you heard of My Sound Delve?
I have not.
So My Sound Delve is, I did an interview with Christian, who developed the app, but it is a pretty interesting. It's not just a soundboard app. It's got some complexity built into it from the standpoint of you can have conditional triggers when certain sounds are played. But if you get a chance, go back and watch that video where he's on Twitter. I just said something about him the other day. But that app is really kind of fun, and it might help you with some of your sound effect stuff.
I will check it out.
Yeah. Well, at this point in time, normally I'm going to do I have a lightning round, which just thrills the children. And it's 5 very simple questions that I'm going to ask you, and fire off some thoughts or some answers. Okay. So one of the ones that people always kind of stutter on is cake or pie.
Oh, for me though, it's very easy. If it is cake, yeah.
Definitely cake.
Yeah. That's easy for me.
Do you have a favorite cake?
Chocolate cake with buttercream, vanilla icing. Very simple, very straightforward. Love it.
That sounds delicious. Do you have a favorite color?
Yes. And I want to say that never be afraid to change your favorite color, because as a child, my favorite color was red. And as I got older, I realized my favorite color is actually purple. And so I tell people my favorite color is purple because it is.
What is your favorite D&D monster?
My favorite D&D monster, that is a little difficult. But I really like undead. I think they're really neat. So I am fascinated by liches.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's the problem is that they're so powerful that it's really kind of hard to put them up against the player, because I mean, they go, here's my finger, you are now disintegrated.
Yeah, right.
Here's my finger, die.
That's a pesky thing.
But I am fascinated by a character who, what psychology would lead you to literally kill yourself in order to live forever, and that's a fascinating thing.
Yes, I agree. And liches are absolutely crazy. I think my favorite monster is a beholder. I've always loved a good beholder.
I did have a beholder show up recently. That episode hasn't come out yet, but not quite in the way you'd think. So
right. Yeah, we fought an undead beholder, and we polished. It didn't even get a chance to do anything, and we killed it. And very, very lucky rolls and a well-placed fireball. And then we fought one straight up, and they're devastating. Almost killed all of us. So
they are
TPK.
so powerful, and that's what I love about Dungeons and Dragons. Is just a couple of rolls is absolutely the difference between I've had villains who die in 3 hits and never get a chance to do anything, and I've had villains that came within a hair's breadth of wiping out the party. So
right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael, it was a pleasure to talk to you. I love the podcast. I'm going to go back and start listening to it because you have an amazing voice. It's very soothing. And I thought if this guy doesn't work in radio, I don't know who would. And you don't, but you kind of do, but you kind of don't. Well, you do.
My background is in radio. I worked at a radio station for 7 years. However, that's that lets other people think I was a DJ. Really wasn't. I worked in the sales department, but I was a DJ for about a year on the weekends. So I can say I was a DJ barely. So my background is in radio, but sort of.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best. If people are watching this right now, go give it a listen. It's quite it's funny. It moves. The sound effects are just incredible. They're so well placed, and they're not intrusive, and it's not cheesy. Mm-hmm. It's so well done. It's almost like you're listening to a movie. So highly recommend it. Go give it a listen. Again, all the links are below. And if you like this video, click the like button, and there's a subscribe thingy over here somewhere. I always get confused because I'm flipped. Yeah, I'm pointing at the right thing this time. So, but all right, Michael, I will talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.